the biodiversity of our lands. And as we face the challenges of climate change, these resources are put under pressure. And as we try to adapt, the issue becomes, like you rightly said, the issue of financing. And what the big issue for us is as you rightly, as you know, it's an issue of we're a high-income country. But that's purely by virtue of size, right? So in absolute terms, we are not high income. And the latest assessment we've done is, in terms of adaptation, over a 10-year period, what we need is about $400 million. And that's impossible for a small country like Seychelles to afford. And the economic crisis caused by the pandemic, in 2020, we had a contraction of 15% in our GDP. We simply do not have the fiscal space to cater for that. So I think in the past we've used a variety of blended finance, but that needs to be scaled up. The amount involved is simply not enough. And even if we stick to blended finance, this is not enough, because we need to be able to finance these projects outside of the country's budget. And the big issue remains for us is an issue of not being able to access concern finance and grants. So unless that conversation changes in terms of what the seeds are pushing, in terms of looking at other criteria for finance, in terms of the vulnerability index, we will not see much improvement in terms of access to finance. But I do see that there are some new innovative measures in other countries which are currently being used. For example, we now have domestic agricultural banks being put in place, looking at protecting the biodiversity as part of these programs. We are looking at what the multilateral agency banks are doing in terms of partnership with different organizations. So I think we all need to come together and be able to find solutions to these kinds of solutions. So right now, like you said, we are still in the infancy of that discussion. And we need to speed things up because we see the effects of climate change. It's happening. It's not something that's going to happen. It's already happening in our country. So we need to speed it up, and we need to have those solutions now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So maybe it's just a follow-up question. So I've heard this from other middle-income countries, that development finance is out of reach for them, but yet they're suffering from climate change now. Do you see any policy recommendations or movements that are happening here in Glasgow, or that we as a community should be pushing to make special windows available for island nations in particular, ones that are middle to... I've heard the same thing from the Bahamas yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think we've been talking about the vulnerability of SAIDs for over 20 years. It's been just stopped, right? Nothing has happened. I now know that the conversation has really started in terms of the Commonwealth is pushing for that, the UN is pushing for that, but what we need is the multilateral institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, to recognize that small island states need to be treated differently, despite being middle income. So that conversation has really gained momentum, and I think throughout COP26, I'm hearing this, but so far, it's the talk. Now we need to see it happen.
Great. Thank you. So, Dr. Joppa, I would love to turn to you and talk a little bit about, since clearly we have a challenge with public finance, what role do you see the private sector playing in this whole debate, and how do you see some of the innovative approaches that can deliver on landscape level change?
Sure. Before I say that, I would just say if it's bothering you that I'm rocking back and forth here, it's not my fault. They gave me that. It's irresistible, kind of, to just... So if I look like I'm swaying in the wind, it's because I am. But look, I think you said it really well in the beginning. You know, commitments are great, but then you have to finance them. You have to make investments in them. And that's what we did, we kind of set out on this journey of setting commitments. We committed to being a carbon negative, water positive, zero waste company by 2030 and protecting more land than we would use, and building a planetary computer to change the way that we monitor and model and manage Earth's natural systems. And then we said, well, how are we going to pay for all of this? And not just how are we going to pay for it for ourselves, but how are we actually going to mature the markets that the world needs to actually achieve a net zero carbon economy or all of the other types of natural services that we need to secure as well. And, you know, you don't have to have taken kind of too many courses in economics to realize that if you want to mature markets, there's really three ways that you can engage in those markets. You can be an investor, you can be a customer, and you could be a donor. And so that's what we decided to do. We said, well, we'll do all three and hopefully play our part there. So we set up this Climate Innovation Fund, $1 billion fund that then kicked off a lot of kind of competitive follow-on funds as well, which is fantastic to see, because what you see there is that there is a significant appetite in the private sector to put its capital to work in especially the nature-based solutions space. And so that's been hugely encouraging to see. I think just since 2020, we've seen multiple multi-billion-dollar funds raised in this area, and that's fantastic. But you know, we also operate a carbon fee inside the company, so we charge for all the carbon that is emitted, and we use that to help accelerate carbon removal markets. And predominantly, if you look at our purchasing portfolio so far, nature-based carbon removal markets, almost 98% of our portfolio is nature-based carbon removal markets. And when we think about that, it's afforestation, reforestation. So it's not so much on the protection side, which we also do, but it's on the restoration and rehabilitation side. And then we also donate a significant amount of money, including $100 million to the new Catalyst Fund that Bill Gates et al. Stood up. But then we have this separate land protection commitment as well, to go out and actually just almost philanthropically protect more land than we use. And so, you know, that's kind of a quasi-market structure that we've kind of brought inside. But I think it's something that you're starting to see replicated across the private sector. At least those that have the resources to do so are starting to put their capital to work. And it's far from sufficient, but it's incredibly important because corporations in the private sector have the ability to put money into the market in different places and in different ways that can fill the gaps that that the market's experiencing. I would just pick up on this blended capital, blended finance perspective, because I think that's a way that the private and public sectors can really work together powerfully to draw more potentially reticent or risk-averse players into the market. I think some of these blended finance vehicles are really going to open up a lot more capital moving into the nature-based solutions side of things.
Great. And maybe a quick follow-up. It's interesting that a technology company would have, you said 98% of your investments as nature-based solutions. I'm just curious, why did you guys decide to go the nature-based route?
Well, that's what's there. I think if you want to buy carbon removal today, which we do, then you're buying nature-based solutions, and that's extremely important. You know, every conversation about climate quickly becomes like a or conversation, and then it ends with it's not an or, it's an and like, what if we just started with the and instead of going through the whole thing? And so, you know, for us, if you look at our Climate Innovation Fund, our future investments that we're making, it's a much more balanced mix there, because we're looking out at like 2040 when we want to see these really like mature returns on our investment. But if you want to actually take action today at meaningful scale, then you must rely on nature. And I think that that's such a nice future present collaboration that you can do with your capital, it makes a lot of sense. I think that we all know that, hopefully by the time technology-based solutions, for instance, for carbon mitigation come into play, hopefully we've saturated all these theoretical thresholds that nature has to offer. And so everybody should be out there playing in the nature-based solutions market right now. I don't know what threshold is right. There's a million papers. I've tried to author some of them. But whatever it is, there's some threshold. Let's have a competition with ourselves. Let's see how fast we can actually max out nature's ability, so that then we can go and top it off with whatever technology needs to fill in with.
Amen. Thanks for that. So we'll probably pick up on that during the Q&A a little bit more. So Stephanie, I want to turn to you, and I'd just love to ask you, I mean, you are running a very large philanthropic fund, and what do you see as the biggest opportunities that private philanthropy, public-private philanthropy can play in this space?
Yes, thank you very much. So what I'm running is a mixed fund, actually. What we are trying to do is that with Legacy Landscapes Fund is exactly to work on the end. To work on the end of public sector funding with philanthropic funding, to work on the end of conservation, protected areas, and nature-based solutions. And this is also why I don't think we are only a biodiversity financing instrument, but we are also a climate change financing instrument, ultimately, because when you do protection, this is always the cheapest solution. And you can't restore carbon when in the same amount that when you can keep the carbon where it is in the natural forest. So the fund is a mix of public sector funding with a match of private sector funding. So this is why we are trying to leverage each other. We are trying to leverage each other's financial capacities, but also each other's advantages, let's say. The public sector is there to not only invest in protected areas, but also to secure them with political capital, which is important. We can secure those protected areas because we don't want one side that works perfectly with a high fence and all the rest is going berserk, basically. So we need the political capital to secure protected areas. The private sector, the philanthropists, are the ones that can mobilize money very quickly, that want to see results very quickly, that are not the administrators, but the ones that are driving those processes. So together we can create the speed, the enthusiasm, but also the quality, the scrutiny, the financial scrutiny, the work we do with political securing of those landscapes. So hopefully now, this is what makes those invested monies more sustainable, because also we need to stop thinking of protected areas or even of nature-based solution as projects that have a 5-year maximum or 3-year. This is a stop and go of protection. It doesn't work like that. There is no half-life of protected areas and there's no stop and go. If we really want to keep nature-based solutions efficient, we need to secure them forever. And this is why we are talking about a 15-year first step to then work more into sustainable eternity, perpetuity funding, whatever you want to call it. And there again, public and philanthropic financing can help, because both of them have certain rooms for maneuver, which we try to bring together. Also in 2005, we had something called the Paris Agenda, which is aid efficiency and not making recipient countries overburdening them with 17 different reports. This is really what happens now in conservation. Those NGOs are implementing, together with the participation of course, of the protected area agencies. They have 17 different projects to juggle. One runs 1 year, the other runs 17 years, and the next one, everybody has once a different report. So we are trying to work against that a little bit with pooling funds to have one fund, one report for 15 years, which hopefully makes gains, gives us efficiency gains. Yeah.
Fantastic. So just to follow up maybe on that, what are you seeing? I mean, I know your fund's relatively new.
Yes.
And what are you seeing as some of the challenges in getting the money out to the field as we sort of open this discussion up with? What are the biggest challenges?
Well, we have several challenges. We have the challenge of different, let's say, state of minds. Because I talked about this as if it would be very easy that governments talk to philanthropists. It's not. It's challenging because everybody has different expectations and different speeds of decision making. So this is a challenge. We need to marry the speed of a philanthropic organization and the ability to decide in just write a check, basically, with a government who wants at least 7, 8, 9 different analyses before they even give the money. So this is what we have as a challenge. So we need to marry those two things without losing the quality, but still getting the speed. What we also need is that we need trusted partners on the ground. And trusted partners on the ground, not only in terms of a donor perspective, because yes, that's fine. We have NGOs who have been doing this for a long time, and we can trust them. But we need them to be trusted partners for the people that matter on the ground, the governments, the protected area authorities, and very important, the local populations. We need to ensure that benefits are not only there for the protection of the site, but for the local people. And we don't work with castle conservation anymore. These times are over. It shouldn't have happened anyway. We now need to work all in sync. It's all hands on deck, and we need to make sure that human rights are there. We need to make sure that grievance mechanisms are there. We need to make sure that benefit sharing is not only tokenism, but real benefit sharing for the local population. Those things take time. Building trust takes time. So even if we are now happily announcing that we're starting to get the money down to the first 3 sites that we have just decided, the way this takes is it takes a little bit of time. But I'm confident that we can speed things up. Yeah.
Fantastic. Maybe we talked a little bit, Minister Hassan, about the challenges that you're facing clearly. And if there's one message that you would have for us, given that there has been this historical push to ensure that small island development states get more financing, especially ones of middle income, what would you say to us? All of us in this room, I'm sure, have access, have energy, have a desire to help out countries like the Seychelles. What would you say to us? How can we help you more?
Seychelles has really shown leadership in terms of driving this agenda forward. And if you look at some of the different initiatives we've taken, the first Debt for Nature swap, the first Blue Bond, so we've shown initiative, and I think it's a word which I've heard very quite often in COP is partnership. We can't do it by ourselves. We need partners to be able to bring this agenda forward, and this is my message. We want to do it. We've got the plan to do it. Now we need different partners on board to help us do it. So that would be my message. Is let's see how we can work together and bring solutions to the table. Now there's a lot of talk of different blended finance, innovations, and everything. Let's see how we can make it work. If you looked at past projects we've done, it's been small. The Debt for Nature swap was just over $20 million. The Blue Bond for 15. We need to scale up those kinds of initiatives to make any meaningful change. So this is my message.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And the Nature Conservancy was quite involved in the original Debt for Nature swap and the Blue Bond. And I will say that, coming in relatively new to the organization, that I know that while that was amazing and transformational in many ways in terms of the first, it wasn't sufficient to cover the full cost of the protected area. And I think we all have to recognize that. I will say that there's a lot of energy in this space now in terms, especially post-COVID, tourism-dependent countries who are really suffering with COVID and helping with that debt burden and in a much, much bigger way. So I think, you were the first, exactly as you said, and we've learned a lot. And now we're going to be announcing a big one tomorrow. And I know there's been talk about even bigger ones for Ecuador and other countries. So it's moving. But you're right, you're a pioneer, and we learned a lot there. So I'm not sure that we're going to be seeing our lovely Minister White. So that's okay, no worries. He's doing important things. He is negotiating, so that's okay. That's what we're all here for. So maybe I will just open it up to the floor, and we can have a robust discussion. Please, can someone? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for all the participants. So I've got a quick question. We've got the public sector, we got philanthropic funding, and we got the tech. We are facing existential crisis at the moment. Isn't it time that we start partnering with startups around the world? We have Silicon Valley in the US has produced amazing startups that's changed our society. Isn't it time we have a Silicon Valley nature style that embraces and works with the public sector, with the funding, with the existing tech structures, and how can each of you encourage that? Thank you.
You're the tech guy.
They're all looking at me. Not all startups are tech startups, but no, I think you're completely right. People always ask, well, what's the role of the private sector? And of course, there's money, et cetera. But the real answer is that's where the solutions are going to come from. That's where the market maturation is going to happen. I think that obviously, I'm going to broaden the tent of clean tech, which is like obviously it has a bad, legacy, kind of in bad taste in people's mouths. It also just doesn't sound good. I don't know. Clean tech doesn't I've never liked the way it hit my brain. But let's broaden that a little bit, and let's include more nature-based solutions in there as well. We are seeing a really steep increase in funding into some of these organizations. So for instance, I'll just use one example. An organization that was previously called Sylvia Terra that did, many of you know them. A small organization started by a PhD in computer science and a PhD in forestry, getting together to build this kind of machine learning shop for counting, individual trees. And they did the hard work, and they built up their company. And as soon as we learned about them, Microsoft, we started investing in them. But by investing in them, I mean we were just giving them money, philanthropy, which is not the most scalable part of ways to mature a market. And I remember talking with the founders just 2 years ago, and saying, how I wish there was a market for them to go into, kind of. And then 2 years later, having to beg to be part of the round, right? And I thought, wow, the world turns fast, doesn't it? And that was just a really good example for me. Now, that's not to say that we have everything we need, et cetera, but I would just argue that there are a lot of really interesting, small, emerging startups in this space, whether that's in the carbon space, the ecosystem services space, the risk assessment space, or there's lots of great things in kind of the fire modeling and breakthroughs and kind of physics constrained machine learning and things like that. So that's where tech, of course, wants to put its money. That's what it's good at assessing. It's good at understanding. I haven't seen the public sector, obviously, that's not really the way the money goes in, but we also could use a lot more public sector R&D investment in that space. That's where I think the public sector has a huge, wildly underutilized potential. It's for us to help incubate the technology to bring the private sector funding, but it's also for the public sector, small, medium-sized, or small and new company loans and all of that kind of stuff, and the spin-outs out of universities. Trust me, if there's a good thing out there right now that's stealth spinning out of University Series A, the private sector is watching and is waiting. That I can tell you. There is a lot of eager capital, but there's actually a dearth of supply, quite frankly.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, and then we'll take your question. I couldn't agree more. I was just sitting here thinking about we have in the U.S. the NIH, which provides incredibly important public funding for health tech and development. And without NIH, a lot of things wouldn't have happened as fast because they're so venture. They needed that public money. There isn't that for nature. If you think about all the U.S. agencies and in most countries, there's not that kind of public space to co-invest with the private sector to seed some of these technologies. So it's a really, really good question, and we should go talk to some of the negotiators about creating something like that. Really good point. Would you like to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all of you. So I work for a French university. So it's not in Marseille, but not very far in Nice. And obviously, we work and we rely on public and private investment through industrial shares and collaborative research. And I was really happy about your intervention because we are facing a real problem of synergy between agendas of private and public investors, the pace, but also the modalities. And I would like to stress, for instance, intellectual property. How do we face that question, us research universities and even, I imagine, also startups? And how can we combine and create more synergy between public and private agenda?
Let me try to take this. I mean, in the development sector, we had public-private partnerships for like 15, 20 years. But often it meant the risks was on the public and the gains was on the private. This was also why, for a certain time, public sector was a bit disappointed from kind of this collaboration. But I think now it has changed a little bit, and especially as we are seeing that there is no way either the private sector or the philanthropists or the public sector can solve this crisis, because the climate change needs money. The adaptation needs money. Now Corona, we can't solve the Corona crisis just by giving out vaccines in Germany or UK. This will never help. So we are realizing the global space, and we are realizing the global responsibility we have, and that all those crises, climate change, biodiversity loss, and even now public health, are all linked. So there's no way that one partner can do it alone. I think what is needed is what we have heard before, is really listening to each other and understanding each other's strength in a certain space. The public sector is not the one who does things quickly. They are not able to decide on one check in 5 minutes, because they can't. This is tax money. We would all not want our money to be spent like that. I mean, we all pay taxes, hopefully, so we don't want that. And then the philanthropists, they want all this bureaucracy, they want to spend money quickly, and they want to see impact. So we need to see how we can manage the space so for everybody to pull the strength, and then to still see, okay, we are all gaining from this. We are losing a bit of our speed in the philanthropic world, but we are gaining potential quality, reporting, financial scrutiny, risk reduction, a lot of risk reduction as well. And in the public sector, they are also gaining something. They're gaining leverage of private sector funding. They're gaining the understanding that you can do things differently. And they're gaining also the power and the enthusiasm, because these are not people who are administering their money. They are really enthusiastically spending their money, and they want to see impact. So I think, and then what the other question was, where is the intel, where is the innovation? Again, when you look at nature, a lot of solutions are not innovative. Protected areas has worked for 50 years, and you know what you do. But how can you bring those people together? This is when innovation comes in. Why don't we learn from each other more? Why don't we partner more? Why is every NGO or every, let's say, the Fish and Wildlife Service and then the German KfW, why are they always inventing things from scratch? We don't have the time anymore to do this, and we should not spend the money anymore to do this. So I think now this is what we call this all hands on deck moment, and let's just learn from each other and respect each other and find the space for everybody to learn and to shine, but also to be tolerant of each other. That would be my hope. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, and I think, I mean, I'd be curious as a follow up to maybe all three of you. I feel like things have changed in just the last couple of years. I don't know if it's COVID or what, but it seems like there's really a spirit of urgency that's bringing us all together so much more than before. I don't know if you guys wanted to comment. Do you feel the same way, or am I crazy?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've seen a change. There's a momentum building, and there's an urgency to it. I don't know if it's COVID, but I think it's we are seeing what's happening to the planet. We are seeing in reality that this is not fake news. This is happening. And I think that's creating that urgency and a momentum now. And I think what I've seen the change is, rather than just from theoretical commitments, we are now seeing how do we make those commitments realities. Because it's all well fine to talk about it, but if we don't see the action on the ground, it means nothing. So this is the shift in momentum which I'm seeing, and which it makes me I'm cautiously optimistic that we've turned the corner, and now we're going to see our actions on the ground, and we need to see it.
Hi, good day. I come from the International Labour Organization, and we've been doing more and more thinking about the relationship between jobs and nature. And so on the other hand, there's a very clear, we've estimated 1.2 billion jobs are directly dependent on nature, and these are threatened. But I actually wanted to get your views on if we invest in nature, what are the job opportunities, or what are the, because there's in the long term, clearly there's no trade-off. But in the short term, there may be trade-offs, or there may be shifts, there may be transitions that we need to deal with. I mean, you spoke about the kind of social dimension of investing in nature. So I just wanted to get some thoughts for you about how do we tackle this perceived or real trade-off between jobs and nature at times? Yes. And what mechanisms or what ideas you have to kind of bridge that?
You want to take that one?
Me or you?
Yeah, let me start, but then you could take. I think what we have done wrong in the past is that we haven't distinguished between benefits. Where do those benefits happen when we conserve nature? It was very easy for us in the Western world, who have destroyed our nature, like very happily over the last 100 years, to say, yeah, it is benefiting all of us, the globe, if we protect some forest in Brazil. So this is a global perspective. Then we have a macroeconomic perspective. What do the Brazilians think of protecting this? Is this giving them enough, maybe ecosystem services, whatever? Can they calculate those? And then we have the local perspective. So what are the people thinking around there? Do they really benefit from it? So I think the word benefiting from nature investments, we need to be really careful. Where do we allocate and where do we see those benefits? And I think for protected areas or nature, you would have direct job creation for people who work in the protected areas. And often enough, there's no other way that people would find a job in a very, very remote area. But this is for very remote areas where you don't have a pressure, like in Indonesia or in Latin America, where you have a lot of people around and the pressure is high. But we also need to see the indirect jobs that this is creating through tourism, which unfortunately now has been declining because of COVID, but also in the ecosystem services. So I think this whole, when we make this, I think in the last report we have heard about a third of the global GPI is depending on nature and biodiversity that is intact. This is again a very macroeconomic perspective that doesn't help any decision maker on the ground. And I think we need to break this as well. So how do we calculate economic benefits in a macroeconomic and in a local way, not only in a global way? And I have not found a solution yet, but I think this is the next challenge. Yeah.
Well, that was well said. I'm just hoping somebody applauds for my comments like you got twice. So I was going to join in, but I won't speak specifically to protected areas, but I will say that, and like the last comments, I wouldn't say I have the answer. I would just say that one of the things that I always am struck by is the kind of the lack of perception of the way that two things. One, that the way that the economy is structured, which is basically at the base, the bulk of the density distribution of the economy is the natural resource economy. And maybe that's a little bit different than nature, but for me it's not. And that is where most of the jobs are. And so when we think about connecting jobs to nature, it's like, well, that's the way the economy is actually structured, is jobs are connected to nature. And actually, when we have natural or breakdowns in nature, when we look at any of the biggest, the economic collapses that we're taught about, they almost all kind of come back, whether that's the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl in the United States, or the collapse of the cod fishery in Canada, or anything else. These like regional or continental wide economic catastrophes are instigated by a disruption of the bottom of the economic pyramid. And so, again, that's not an answer. I would just say that I think when we think about jobs and nature, I think it does behoove us to at least recognize that nature actually is where the jobs are already. And that's what scares me, quite frankly, about the continuing breakdown of ecological systems, is that is the bulk of the economic activity on Earth. And so, unfortunately, you don't get to start at the top of the pyramid and work your way down. You're going to crack it from the bottom, and that's going to fissure all the way up. So maybe that wasn't super optimistic and hopeful, but I just think that it's just a simple mindset shift that I think people are like, how do we connect jobs to nature? And I'm like, my definition of nature is different, but in some macroeconomic sense, that is the way things work, and in others, it's absolutely not. And particularly in the strict, or at least mixed and strict preservation of nature, that's not the way things work.
Yeah, exactly. Completely. I mean, I've heard this actually from trade unionists before, that there's no jobs on a dead planet, right? So, I mean, they are really connected, but I think the points that you make are really important for short term. Sir, please.
Thank you. I'm from the Center for Human Ecology. When it was in Edinburgh, I co-founded the Center for Human Ecology 50 years ago. I'm probably the oldest here. And I follow Stephanie's point, not to reinvent the wheel. I think this is absolutely vital. But there is one old program of finance around the world, and it used to be called a resource tax. I think we now need to change the name, and it's come up in the Financial Times again, just in the last days, mainly from Professor Rajan, who was the financial advisor to the IMF. He knows his stuff. And at a meeting, I've actually spoken with him. So I've got here a leaflet describing a very simple way. It needs to be introduced with a question to the Seychelles. What is your per capita carbon emission? The emission, the allocation that we can each have to emit carbon into the atmosphere is a global ecosystem resource, which we cannot pay for however much money we have. But we can pay each other to reduce it. But it would be interesting to compare what goes on here and now with what goes on in your home country, for instance. And the proposal is that the UN, not local governments, the UN creates a global fund into which anybody who emits more carbon dioxide or uses any other natural resource in excess, anything that can be measured, which is difficult, carbon dioxide included, it's difficult to measure what we're doing. But insofar as you can, anyone who emits more than the global average pays into the fund, and anyone below the global average, and I guess that's the Seychelles, I don't know, certainly India and China, let us not forget, often blamed for having such a high carbon output. But you know, if you draw a line around a country as big as China, of course it's got a high carbon output. It's a completely meaningless statement. Even Al Gore made it on the radio. So anybody below receives from that fund. And in that way, the thing that yesterday, I think in the main sessions was a finance session, this idea, an old idea, revived by a previous advisor to the World Bank, supported by a whole lot of people, I've got leaflets here about it, has been forgotten. And it overrides that. Then, with that, within a country, you have to distribute as any local people and government would like. I just put that on the table, and anybody can have a leaflet. I think I've got enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Hassan.
Thank you for that, sir. And in fact, this is exactly what we're thinking. And of course, without having any figures on hand now, I'm pretty sure Seychelles is a net absorber in terms of carbon with 1.4 million kilometers of EEZ, with all the mangroves on the coast, which is an absorber of carbon and storage of carbon. And look, I know one of the projects that's been pioneered at the moment is to actually calculate in terms of the seagrass, what is that potential in terms of absorbing carbon and storing that. And that's the first part of that exercise, be able to measure it, how much in terms of net absorption we have, and absolutely having those kinds of structure in the sense that those countries that are net producers of carbon is able to compensate those that are absorbing the carbon. So I would absolutely... Yeah. Yeah, but absolutely, this is exactly what we want to see and explore further. Thank you.
So just to put it in perspective, the Seychelles has a marine protected area that's twice the size of the United Kingdom. It's huge, and I completely agree with your point that we should all be paying for that global ecosystem service that's provided. So excellent point. Other questions? Lots of questions. Who's got the microphone?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and speaking to us. I'm Sydney. I'm a graduate student at the Yale School of the Environment. I had a question for you. So, Dr. Joppa, you kind of mentioned the race to max out nature, which I thought was kind of intriguing. So I was wondering from all of you, kind of how to mitigate the risk, I think, that would go with that kind of speed and, like doing such important work so quickly, and the risk of maybe land grabs or incentivizing protecting the wrong ecosystems. And yes, kind of the risk of doing more harm than good, I guess. Thank you.
Sure, I would just say that there's two risks. There's the risk that we don't do it, and there's the risk that we do it wrong. And we can't ignore either of those risks. I would say that maybe I'm giving an entire field of conservation. Maybe I'm giving the field that I come out of too much credit, which is classic confirmation bias from a desperately recovering academic. But I would say that there is a lot of work in the exact sort of world that Stephanie's working in on conservation, and particularly large-scale protection, that there have been mistakes made, and there have been a lot of successes as well, and there's been a lot of learnings. And I would like to think that that doesn't mean to say that every learning that the field has had is going to carry us perfectly forward. But I will, it does seem like, well, at least the number of mistakes that have been made have led to a significant amount of learnings. And I would like to think that, compared to 50 years ago, we are significantly better now in our ability to go out and roll out large-scale, inclusive, and just protection programs. But so it's not to say that I don't worry, but I would say that again, this kind of comes out to that and or thing. I think this is where the protection kind of debate comes in. Is like, okay, but there's all these other issues. You're like, yes, but there's all these other issues. And I think that if we keep moving forward in an ever more kind of inclusive manner, then, and I mean, I would just say that TNC has really led the way, at least in my mind, in how to do some of these projects. But anyway, I'll let the experts speak.
No, but it's a little bit of what I said before. With the fund that I'm now running for almost only 6 months. I come from an NGO. I have worked also with the World Bank, so I have seen the public sector and I have seen the NGOs. I think we know a lot, and we know what we have done wrong, and we know what we need to try to do better, and we need to now, especially the risk of dropping people. This is the biggest risk right now that we are facing, because we are all rushing now into saying, yeah, we need to save the forest, we need to restore the forest, we need to. But what about the people? And I think this is something we are still learning. We are still learning, and we will probably need to learn for a while. And we need to open up that space to not learn only us as in the conservation world and in the funders world, but we need to speak with the people much more. We need to find ways of speaking to each other much more bluntly and frankly, and listen to each other much more. And I think that is the next big field that we all have to learn in the conservation community. And some NGOs have led the way. Some other NGOs are still hesitant. The public sector is very risk averse, maybe too risk averse often. The private sector or the philanthropists want to rush forward, and they say, this is my passion, I don't care about X, Y, and Z. So this is a moderation exercise and a learning exercise, and I think the more people we get on the table, and this is the next thing we need to do in the conservation world, we need to empower those local people. We have a lot of empowered local people, indigenous communities from Latin America. This has been going on for a long time. They are respected, they know to speak, they are organized very well. But you can't transfer this to Asia. The space is very, very narrow for NGOs, for indigenous people in Asia. Very narrow, and getting more narrow by the day. We're not working towards democracy in lots of countries, unfortunately. So this is the role we also have to play for conservation, a rights-based conservation. We can only have this when we give land titles to the local people and so on and so forth. So this is the next space we all need to learn from each other. Yeah.
Fantastic point. I can't think of anyone better to be running the Landscape Legacy Fund than you. You have such deep field experience and the public sector side, so great comments. We have time for one more question, please.
Hi, I work in nature restoration. I'd like to ask about longevity of finance and funding for nature-based solutions. As so often public funding and grant mechanisms are short-term. So how do you think that private finance can help to push the ambition into longer-term investment so that we can really deliver ecological outcomes?
Good question. Anyone want to take that? Longevity of investments.
Yeah, I think if you look at one of the initiatives that we did for the Debt to Nature swap, I think in terms of the longevity, is that part of the payback goes into endowment funds, and that itself makes it sustainable in the long run. The issue that we face is simply an issue of scale, because we did it for $20 million, and the amount that goes into the endowment funds is not enough for the longevity of it. But I think that model exists. It's just a matter of scaling it up to make it more sustainable moving forward. So I think we have the model. Now we need to, like I said before, scale it up so that it can work.
Yeah, thank you. This is exactly what we are also trying to do with the Legacy Landscapes Fund. We're giving a 15-year contract at the beginning, which is already quite long-term for conservation. And within the 15 years, we're trying to build up the endowment. Because some of those areas might not need an endowment because you have REDD+ coming in, or the national funding comes in, or another funding is able to pay for protected areas, better tourism levies or whatever. But in some areas we don't have any alternatives, so then we would try to build up an endowment for those areas. And I think conservation trust funds, that could be a model where people who want to spend money quickly, and sometimes this is the government, because by 12th of December they realize, we still have something to spend. So then all the conservation trust funds can say, hello, we are still here. This is our account number. So this is good. But also for the philanthropists, sometimes they just want to spend money quickly and then say, okay, we don't need a 15-year scale, but we want to give you something to kickstart. You do that. Less so than the governments. But I think conservation trust funds can be a solution for long-term investment. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we've seen that some of the most effective mechanisms for conservation finance for permanence are a blended approach. We have some sinking because it's just, as you said, an endowment fund, you need so much money. If you're just taking between 5 and 7 and 8% every year, you need a big account. So, well, great. Well, I think we're gonna. I'd love to thank my panelists so much. That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you all. Big round of applause, please. After a long few days. And also appreciate you guys all coming. This is definitely a marathon, this COP, as they all are. But this one in particular seems very, very intense. And I just want to thank you all for your time, your attention, and your interest. And let's go out there and keep fighting. Thank you so much.